All right, so this video is all about exactly what to do instead of use porn. And it was inspired by a question from Against Gravity. And he says, as you know, PMO can be used as a coping mechanism or for escapism. At the same time, it is also true it's better to substitute bad habits than to just eliminate them. That is correct. Because just removing leads to a gap that, if not filled, feels painful, potentially reinforcing the cycle of pain and escape. So, considering it's necessary to substitute or escape into something else, it would be cool if you created a hierarchy of escapism based on what's better to escape into. Okay, so I like this question. I like where your head's going. It's kind of like turning quitting porn and habit replacement into like a video game where if I can just keep choosing better and better escapes, then I'm leveling up and that sort of thing. And I like that, but I think I want to tackle this question from a different angle that I think will hopefully be a little bit more useful. So the first thing that I got to cover here is defining what is escapism, okay? Because you say, what are better escapes than porn? And I think that we don't want to escape into another escape. Like I fundamentally view escapism as like a negative thing. It's about running away from something. And at Frontline Man, we're all about never running away. We're about constantly forward advancement toward what we want. So the way that I define it, and being a little bit semantic here, but I think it's important to make this distinction, is that I only see escapes as you running away from what you truly want. So the goal isn't to escape into a better escape, it's to move forward, it's to attack. Okay. And that's what we're looking for, is where do we actually head forward rather than backward? Now, when it comes to cravings, there are two kinds of cravings, and that's going to really affect what we do depending on the type of the craving. We've got chemical cravings and we've got emotional cravings. And I've covered this before, so I'm going to just try and go through it relatively quickly here. All right. Chemical cravings are basically when you just have a neurochemical hunger for your fix. All right. So it's just like you've trained your brain to be hooked on the dopamine from porn. And so your brain itches periodically saying, hey, I want my pleasure. And there's nothing deeper involved. It's literally just a process of walking down that path to porn to get a reward. This is something that every porn user is going to face if he uses porn with any sort of frequency. And it's solved by pretty much just not using it. And eventually the chemical craving fades, just in the same way as it would for if you were hooked on caffeine or nicotine. Yeah, there's going to be withdrawal symptoms initially. You're going to have cravings. And then after you go long enough, those cravings disappear. So let's now define how we solve each kind of these cravings, and even if what we do if they show up together. All right. So chemical cravings, they're best solved by simply engaging in a flow state of doing something else while the craving passes. Right? That's really it. It's like if a chemical craving comes up, just go do something else. Occupy your mind, occupy your body, and that craving will subside, and then you can just move forward. In order to do that, we've got a practical component and we've got a mental component. The mental component is we got to shift the narrative. So when a chemical craving comes up, the default narrative underneath that emotion is, hey, I'm not okay. I need to use my porn. I need to use porn to be okay. It's something our body needs or our mind needs. All right. And so we got to rewrite that. And we got to say, actually, this discomfort isn't a sign that I'm not getting something I need. This discomfort is actually a sign of this addiction leaving my body. That's what we want to embrace. We want to see it as a temporary thing that will pass, that is beneficial for us, just by simply not acting on it. And all we got to do is go do something else until that craving disappears. Okay. So that's pretty simple, right? Emotional cravings, though, the response is a little different, because emotional cravings will absolutely stick around. They don't just pass, okay? Like you could go distract yourself doing something else, and then once you're done with that thing, guess what? That emotional craving is going to be right there again. It's going to keep hitting you. And this is where, guys will say oh, I'm having cravings that last all day or weeks or hours or whatever it is. They just feel like the cravings never let up. That means that they've got emotional cravings, because their underlying emotions that they've used porn to cope, to treat, they haven't changed. So with this kind of situation, you have to address that core emotion. Chemical cravings, we just basically distract ourselves, do something else. With emotional cravings, we got to solve the emotion. But before we do either of those, we kind of got to decide what sort of craving is it, right? It could be a chemical craving, it could be an emotional craving, or it could be both of them together. Before we talk about what to actually do, let's talk about how we identify your craving type. The way we do that is by using the first frontline man question, which is, what do I want? We want to ask ourselves when we're dealing with a craving, what do I want? And we want to ask it on a deep level. I call it the heart shift. We want to shift out of just the surface level of our mind, because that surface level is basically going to say, well, what do I want? I want porn. Okay, so we got to go a little deeper than that. Go down, sink down into your heart and be like, what do I want here? All right. And if you just find a physical itch or a restlessness that you would like to solve, well, then that's basically a chemical craving. But if you find another emotion there, like you feel like, oh, well, I want to solve this stress, or I want to feel less lonely, or I want to feel less anxious, or whatever, then there's some level of an emotional craving as well. Now, I want to add this as a note here. Your ability to identify emotional cravings is going to be limited by your self-awareness. So you might have emotional issues if you've got a porn problem. Most guys who have porn problems do, but like you might initially process them as just like neurochemical noise because they haven't been brought to the surface yet. They're still in your unconscious. That's fine. You know, I can't really walk through how you do handle all of that stuff right now. If you went through my full program, you know, that will absolutely systematically surface these sorts of issues as you go through it. But for the sake of this video, all you got to do is, if you don't see any emotions, just treat it like a chemical craving. Okay. Even if it's not one, eventually just pushing through will cause that emotion to rise to the surface. And then you can treat the actual emotion. To summarize this step, when you've got a craving, ask yourself, what do I really want here? And if it's just a physical itch, you've got a chemical craving. And if there are other negative emotions, then you've got an emotional craving. If you got both, well, then obviously you've got both. Okay. So what do we do then? How do we actually address them? So we'll start with the chemical stuff. All right. So one of the hardest things to do is to just sit and stare at a craving. You know, I think that there's a lot of mindfulness guys out there who just tell you to urge surf, just be present with it and that sort of thing. I just think that's a massive drain on willpower. You know, there might be some benefit to doing that sometimes. Sometimes you might need to because there's nothing else that you can do. But generally speaking, I would say that's a bad answer. And since the trick to defeating a chemical craving is to just let it pass, the most efficient thing you can do is get yourself into a flow state. What would be a good example of that? Well, okay, you could do productive things or you could do leisure. Either one works, and it's just going to be circumstantial about what you want to do. So when you identify a chemical craving, you just got to get yourself into a flow state of basically doing anything that you won't regret later. And this comes in two flavors, either productivity or leisure. So the productive stuff are the things where it's going to cost maybe a little bit of willpower. So like doing work, doing chores, exercise, meditation, prayer, that kind of thing, right? These are great. If you feel like you can do that, 100%, that'll often crush a porn craving. But the problem is many guys try to only do this. They think that I'm going to turn all of my porn cravings into peak productivity. This is a problem because if you put yourself into a position of use porn or be productive, like you make it a binary where it's like either I'm going to use porn and relapse here, or I have to be productive. Well, that's going to be a problem, especially if you're tired and overwhelmed. And chances are, if you're tired and overwhelmed, you're not going to want to be productive. So it's like, oh, well, I guess I use porn, and then you're going to relapse, okay? This is why the leisure option is very important, especially when you're in the thicker parts of handling a reboot from porn, okay? You need to be able to go softer on yourself. Essentially, what you're doing is like you're rehabbing your brain. So if you just had a knee replacement, you're not going to be going out and doing heavy squats the next day. You need to take it easy. You need to know when to take it easy. Leisure activities that you could do when you got a chemical craving are going for a walk, hanging out with people or giving them a call, napping or going to sleep, some kind of recreation that you won't regret later. Like you could watch a show or listen to a podcast or whatever. Just make sure it's not something that you'll regret. Let it be something that you actually want. Otherwise, it's just escape. If you just like, I'm just going to go eat 10 bags of candy, chances are you're going to regret that later. That's just trading an escape for an escape. Like we said, we don't want to do that. Doesn't mean you need to be peak form all the time. Doesn't mean you need to be constantly striving to move forward. but just don't do stuff that you're going to regret. All right. And if you get yourself doing a flow state, well, then that craving will pass and eventually your brain will be healed after you process a finite number of these things. And that's one thing to remember, is that there is literally a finite number of chemical cravings that you will have to work through before you're free, right? There's not an infinite amount. They're all temporary, they're all short. They're all going to be possible. They're all going to be handleable. None of them are really going to be that bad on the chemical level. All right. It's not going to like completely knock you out. And even if you do reach some, intense points, it's not going to come from the chemical side. And, heck, even if you do, right, like you're a heavy user and you got some significant withdrawal, again, that's only going to be a short period and you will absolutely get to the other side of it. All right. So remember that. Now, when it comes to what you do when you're dealing with emotional cravings, the strategy is a bit different. Okay. So like I was saying, these things can just leave you triggered for not like hours nonstop. And the answer to these is basically to use the frontline questions. We talked about one of them here, which is, well, what do I want, right? That identifies the core emotion. So maybe that's like, well, I want to feel connection to solve this loneliness, or I want to get this project done that's stressed me out, or I want to have resolution with my wife because I just got into a fight with her and it's got me like all upset, okay? Find out what the emotion is looking for. All emotions have a desire attached to them if you just look for it, right? That's what emotions are. They are just a neurochemical form of desire. So just identify the desire, the deepest one that you can. So once you find the desire, you say, well, how can I win? How can I move toward satisfying that desire? That might be something practical. It might be a mindset shift. It might be both. In the example of, I'm stressed out because I got to get all this work done. Well, how can I win? Well, like maybe get some of the freaking work done. Stop avoiding it. And maybe in order to do that, I got to step into a better mentality, or I got to, maybe I'm going to Pomodoro things. Maybe I'm going to time block it. Maybe I'm going to just, sit down and just literally start. All right. Whatever it is, identify the path, right? How can I win? That question is really just a brainstorming. List out your options and then just pick the one that makes the most sense to you. And then from there, if you need to, you go into the third question of who will I be, right? And this is about tapping into the mindset of the guy who can follow that path, right? So how do I have to think differently here in order to follow it? Like if I'm feeling resistance to sitting down and I'm just thinking about, oh, I hate this work, blah, 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 blah. Well, who do I have to be? Well, I'm be the guy who can just embrace his work. He realizes it's not so bad, that it's not a big deal. I know how to do this stuff. I just got to get going with it. If you do that, guess what? That emotional craving is going to like feel cut off at the knees and sometimes completely eliminated. And the trick is to know that you don't need to actually solve all of these core desires in order to overcome the part that's creating the craving. Your inner self just needs to know that you are taking that desire seriously. Because it's like these negative emotions, they're like alarm bells, all right? They're like a little part of you shouting out, hey, something's wrong. And as long as it feels like you're aware of the problem and working on it, it'll relax. It doesn't need it solved. So like say you realize, I'm lonely. Well, I don't even know who to connect to or how to connect to people. But you say, well, I'm going to set a plan to do that. I'm going to plan to put in a social interaction, game plan into place. Maybe it's going to be reaching out, whatever. I got to do some brainstorming. I'm too tired to do it right now, but I'm going to do that tomorrow. Well, if you say that sincerely, that might be enough. You might not need to go out and have all these friends right away to just make that craving go away. That part just needs to know, hey, I give a shit. I'm here. That's the emotional side in a nutshell. And what do you do if you get both? It's a chemical craving and an emotional craving. Well, you just have a combo answer. And simplest way, an example would be go for a walk first, process the chemical part, and then while you're walking, figure out the emotional part. That's like the top recommendation that I have. There's other ways to do it too, but generally speaking, this is like the core strategy. It's not exactly like the hierarchy of replacements, but I hope it showed you the hierarchy of importance, like what you need to be focusing on when you're dealing with a craving. Okay, because what you do is really determined by what you're dealing with, right? It's not as simple to say as, oh, well, every time I get a craving, meditation is the best answer or prayer is the best answer. No, it's always contextual. And so much of quitting porn is really just about being able to be present with yourself and understand where you're currently at and give yourself what you need. And that's always going to fluctuate and change. And as long as you're willing to engage in this process, you're going to be able to quit, right? Especially if you're using good techniques. And that's where things like the Metascript method, which is a journaling technique that lets you apply everything I just talked about every single day. It lets you pre-program your mind so that you do this stuff. And you can learn this technique and how to do this in just 5 minutes a day by clicking the link in the description. And a lot of guys got a tremendous amount of value from this. So I hope you check it out if you're looking to modify your behaviors and you want it to happen easily and stop fighting yourself. So yeah, check that out. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments below. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Ooh, yeah.